What I'm going to present now may look like the usual intellectual patricide, yeah? Here's the grandfather and now you destroy him. But that's, I hope, not really my agenda, yeah? So the poetics is not the anxiety of influence and how do I overcome it. The poetics is closer to something that I find in a novel by the Austrian writer Thomas Bernhard. In his novel Old Masters, Alte Meister, the main character of the novel goes to the Vienna Art Museum, Fine Art Museum, every day and looks at a painting by Tintoretto, the bearded man by Tintoretto, because, and that's the ambition, he wants to find the one flaw that is in this otherwise so perfect painting. So I'm still trying to discover the one flaw that there possibly is in Joseph Weiler's work. No, the idea is, I was listening to him in the first discussion that we had of his work when it was still the 20th anniversary of the publication of the Transformation of Europe. It was during this presentation that he all of a sudden came up with the idea there's a Messianic element in the legitimation of the European Union. It was a Messianic project, and I immediately, coming from the Western Marxist tradition, I immediately reacted with this belief, no, Messianic, it is Ernst Bloch is Messianic, Walter Benjamin is Messianic, not the European Union. And I tried now to make sense of his claim, and I discovered the following. While I still have reasons to doubt whether that he was right about ascribing to the European Union a messianic source of legitimacy, he is still, the great master that he is, getting at something. And I just wonder whether we could try to articulate it in a slightly different language. Maybe it's not messianism, maybe it's something different. So here is his basic claim. You find it in the afterword to the volume that we presented last year here on commemorating 25 years of the transformation of Europe. So as a third type of legitimacy, he first talks about input legitimacy, output legitimacy, but now there's a third type of legitimacy that has fed into the European Union, telos legitimacy or political messianism, whereby legitimacy is gained neither by process nor output. It's not the results that count, but the promise of an attractive promised land. And you see where there's something messianic that describes to it. You move to a different world. That's the idea. We bring you to a different world. And you know, there is this rhetoric on the slide that you projected here yesterday. You destroyed my presentation yesterday by putting on your slide words by Adenauer, in which Adenauer exactly expresses this spirit. This is a new age that we are moving to. Nationality will no longer matter. So there is messianic sounding rhetoric surrounding the European integration process, and this is something that I don't want to deny it. What I want to examine a little bit more closely is how Weiler presents this claim. Here is, again, a quotation from his article. He talks about the Schuman Declaration only, and there's not much in the Schuman Declaration that we can actually work with, yeah? It's the idea we have to have world peace, and there will be conflict between Germany and France will be impossible, and we take it step by step. We make incremental process by creating de facto solidarity, and this is why I always sense there's the influence of French public international law doctrine, actually, and not messianic teachings. Nevertheless, Joseph believes that the Schuman Declaration gives us a compelling vision which has animated now at least 3 generations of European idealists. He believes it's something akin to the American Declaration of Independence. We can talk about it in discussion, yeah? But it has animated 3 generations of European idealists where, and here it is, that's the substance. The closer union among the people, there's a typo actually in the book, should see the closer union among the peoples of Europe, which peace and prosperity as an icing on the cake constitutes the beckoning promised land. So the closer union among the peoples of Europe is the vision of the promised land. And he says, yes, it talks about peace, but it's about something that's more profound because it required at the time that the project was founded a certain audacity. It required on the part of those who were victims of Nazi Germany, and most of the countries in Europe were affected by Nazi Germany, a lot of Christian virtue, the virtue of forgiveness, repentance, or the virtue of forgiveness, the virtue to start over, yeah, on the part of Germany, to make a credible commitment of repentance and renewal. So there were the Christian ideas that fed into, or the Christian virtues rather, that fed into this project. And they became combined in this process, this is his observation, with the Enlightenment idea of a federation of republics. So it's in a sense Immanuel Kant as the substance, and the motivational energy that made it possible was Christian virtues. So he then alludes, of course, to the Christian Europe as well. So the question is, this is all that he gives us. It's the vision of an idyllic kingdom, and the idyllic kingdom can be further spelled out either in Enlightenment or even in Christian terms. And it has predominated the European integration process and has eclipsed any concerns that we should have had, or the Union should have had, with democracy and human rights, at least in the beginning. Yeah. Now, interestingly, the description of of the legitimacy of the European Union, the reconstruction of the legitimacy of the European Union in terms of Messianism, reflects a pessimistic mindset on the part of Joseph Weiler, because the next thing that follows then is all Messianic projects are bound to fail. So this project was bound to fail as well. So the European Union, in his view, has already failed, and the reason why it has failed was that it was a Messianic project, because all Messianic projects collapse, because they turn out to be unrealizable, and if parts and bits and pieces of it are realized, it becomes so complex and Byzantine that nobody really can like it any longer. Yeah, so that's I can see where he's getting to this. The question that I would like to explore here is it really Messianic? And if it's not Messianic, what would be the alternative? What is it that Joseph has a sensibility for? What is it that he really sees and perceives correctly, but maybe has just put the wrong name on it? First, is it really Messianic? I distinguish in my paper two different conceptions of Messianic politics. One is polemical, goes back to the work of an Israeli political scientist by the name of Jacob Telman. The other one is more nuanced and actually very persuasive and very good. It's Joseph Weiler's distinction between Exodus politics on the one hand and the pursuit of Messianic projects on the other hand, that he has sketched so beautifully in what I think is one of his most successful books ever, Exodus and Revolution. Telman first, the polemical concept. According to Joseph Telman, a project is Messianic if it believes that at the end of times, humanity will be part of a preordained harmonious scheme of things. Yeah? A final stage of humankind, the classless communist society the state has withered away. Then, second element, for a Messianic project that is moving towards this in some respect, even though it's always difficult to decide, it depends on the version of Messianism that you subscribe to, whether you can do something to bring it about or not. But that's a different story. But in light of this objective, politics becomes universally relevant. At least this is what Jacob Telman believes. So, Messianic political projects are about attaining a final and desirable end state of humankind. And in order to reach this end, everything that you do in your life matters. The distinction between those who believe in it and those who do not believe in it, those who are followers and who are not followers, is relevant for everything that you do. Austrian social democracy, my favorite example, of the 1920s was clearly Messianic, because you had social democratic soccer teams, social democratic debating clubs, social democratic schools, clearly, but also social democratic chess tournaments. Distinction between red and black, or conservative and social democratic was omni-relevant for your life, and I imagine that the party understood that a social democrat can only marry a social democrat, everything else would be false. So it goes all the way throughout your life. And then finally, and I think Telman is getting here at something, politically Messianic projects, and Marxism is his paradigm, of course, for this, have a foundational grand theory. A foundational grand theory that tells you something about human nature, the foundations of society, how society works, and how societies move through history. Now, if we apply these three criteria to the European Union, the European project, it's quite clear that it is not Messianic in the Talmonian sense. It is not, because the omnirelevance of being pro or contra Europe is not something that you can take for granted. It doesn't dominate our experience, and there's no foundational grand theory. Yeah? Perhaps there's a preordained scheme of things, but you know, I'm skeptical when it comes to this too. Now Tellman himself shares something with Weiler, and that is that he uses his own term, relatively inflationary. And he says, when the French Revolution is born, an alternative way of doing resistance was born. The dumb savage resentment changed into a realization of rights and into a messianic expectation, the dread of riot into a never receding fear of some total upheaval. Every riot seemed a token of approaching the day of judgment. So he uses it very broadly. Any political movement that has an objective then counts, or some vision of the future then counts as messianic. But he thereby actually departs from the concept that he has developed beforehand. Okay, I have to cut this short. I give you briefly Walzer's alternative picture. Walzer's alternative picture is a little bit more precise because he draws more, he's closer to the work of a great German-born Israeli Judaist, Gershom Scholem, who has written much about the Messianic heritage in Judaism. And the core idea of Messianic politics, or of a Messianic project, even in religious terms, if it's a religious project, emerges quite clearly here. Something is Messianic if there's a vision of the end of historical time. But the end of historical time is also brought about by a rupture with the historical process. The historical process ends, has to end, and then we are moving into the Messianic age. Moving to the Messianic age will also radically alter human nature. We are no longer going to be the bourgeois type of people who we are, yeah? With our self-interest and our limited altruism and all that give rise to the circumstances of justice. This will no longer be necessary because spontaneously we will be all helping each other and be nice to each other and live in the spirit of solidarity. And third, I think that's an important point, on the part of Messianists, there's a readiness to force the end. Messianic politics empowers people to do awful things because, for some reason, the Messianic project permits people to accelerate the process, to accelerate the process until we see the final day at which the Messianic kingdom will be erected. So it is a license to violence. And again, I think it's quite evident that this is not a good fit. It's not a good fit when it comes to the European Union. One more thing on Walzer. Walzer presents the Exodus, and I close here, presents the Exodus. I don't get to the empty signifier, too bad. Walzer presents the Exodus as an alternative to the Messianic project that is actually an inspiration for Judaism and beyond Judaism, Protestant forms of pursuing political projects and modern, more secular projects of pursuing politics. And Exodus is a way, of course, of shedding oppression, overcoming oppression, making a covenant, moving to a promised land, but then you're not leaving historical times. You're still confronted with real human beings that struggle with attaining the objective. And you know, if you study Weiler's earlier work, in particular the introduction to the Constitution of Europe, you get more and more references to the Exodus. Even the golden calf makes its appearance at a certain point. Moses, yeah, speaks, we will do and hearken, yeah, all that. And it all fits the Exodus story without the Messianic overtones and without the Messianic additions far better. So in a sense, what I've presented here, and I conclude here because I have to conclude, this is an internal critique of Joseph Weiler's presentation of the European Union. Exodus may have been actually the better model if you are really into the project of presenting the European project from the perspective of the Old Testament. And there is something to it, I don't want to deny it. It's actually part of our political language. The Exodus is something, a heritage on which we can all draw if we want to understand processes of transformation and emancipation, in a sense. Yeah. All right. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have the questions and answers. Can I take profit of my privileged position for just a very fast comment? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah.
I miss in one of the when you're talking about Talmud and Taubes, Gershon Scholem,
Yeah.
and probably when you're maybe it would be an idea to analyze the position of the Messianic thought in Weiler with the example of Sabbatai Sevi.
Huh.
And the discussions between Maimonides and some of the rabbinic and Talmudic interpretations of the Talmud and the Ancient Testament. Simply an idea.
Yeah.
But it's
No, of course,
it's
no.
simply one,
Well,
comment.
that's the most.
Because I think when you analyze Joseph by the perspective of Messianism, is
Yeah.
influenced by Sabbatai Sevi's dramatic.
I have no idea what he's influenced by because he doesn't cite any sources. Yeah, I know the Gershon Scholem wrote this voluminous book on Sabbatai Sevi, as we call him in German. Yeah, Sabbatai Sevi or Sabbatai Sevi, who in the 17th century was active in Albania. Is this true? Yeah, was it on the territory of what is now Albania? Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. And
geographically.
he started the Messianic movement, was regarded as the Messiah.
Still is for some.
Still is for some. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. But you know, there are other. I fully agree. I have to look into it if I want to pursue this project any further. One way of presenting my project would be to say this is not just work in progress, it's work in regress as well, yeah? Because I feel that I've started a moment of intellectual regression when I turned into it, yeah? But no, I will have to look into this. But there are different, I don't need to tell you, different versions of, different visions of the Messianic age. Maimonides, the conservative, yeah? Vision of the Messianic age, in a sense the liberal vision of the Messianic age. It actually looks at the kingdom of the Messiah as a situation where the Torah is finally fully observed, yeah, and people are obedient followers of the Torah. There's no recreation of humankind, no recreation of nature. So there are always different visions, yeah. This makes it so difficult to work with this concept in the first place, yeah. So I struggle with all of this, yeah.
And don't forget Paul.
Yeah. Well, Christian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please, more questions.
Yeah, I'm not a theologist, so I also don't, like, my question is what the promised land is and how much the Bible or the Torah actually gives substance to that. And related to that, I wonder whether it's right to call Messianic registers a type of legitimacy, but certainly they have been used politically, if only by Kohl in his promise of flowering landscapes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so that's probably the most fitting ones. In the
right.
early kind of legitimating discourses around around the European communities, we see a lot of kind of promises, and I wonder whether redemption might be a better metaphor for that.
Yeah,
because that's the backward-looking
yeah.
idea, a trope of against war and national thinking. But maybe progress would be even more fitting, kind of progress.
Progress, yeah.
Kind of the idea of a kind of a voluntary act on human nature.
Yeah.
Hallstein kind of referred to integration as incorporating the a mode where politics is no longer the art of the possible. Where one of the main aims of government was to preserve the status quo. Today, it might be better described as the art of the maximum possible.
Yeah,
and kind of that together with speeches like "do something brave," impose our will on reality. So you do get a lot of that.
That's right. You do get, and it's something. It was in a sense in the genes of Europeans in the modern age to exaggerate every political project into turning it something that looked like we are reaching a new stage in humanity and everything will alter now, personal relations will be completely different. Yeah, that's right. I also wonder, when we look back in the situations 1950s, 1960s, whether there was a desire on a rhetorical level to come up with something that was rhetorically as promising as perhaps the creation of a classless society, a society where everything is available in abundance, where people treat each other with respect and all that. So maybe it was just an alternative way of getting to a similar promised land. Now the promised land is interesting. Even if you look at the Exodus interpretation of the promised land that I find in Waltzer's work, it is about the absence of scarcity, milk and honey. Yeah, so there will be enough to eat. Yeah, the absence of scarcity is something there as a vision. not complete essence of philosophy, but you don't have to suffer anymore. There will be no more famine, nobody will be hungry any longer. That's one thing. But there's always, in addition to it, also in the Exodus story, the promise that the attitudes with which people treat one another will be better as a result of this. Yeah? Now, I see that Joseph could at this point say, well, if we eliminate nationalism, if we no longer oppress the stranger, isn't this a shorthand for the one principle that is needed in our societies to make our societies better? Yeah? But then, overcoming oppression and exploitation, yeah? Overcoming social divisions and social hierarchies, these values are then absent from it. And I think a fully Messianic project would bring this on board. So just overcoming nationalism, just not oppressing the stranger is not sufficient, I think, for to constitute a Messianic project. I look at you, I'm lost because I need a confirming nod. I feel better if you now confirm. Yeah, that's a Messianic project. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so this is where
prosperity, of course,
prosperity. Yeah, that's there.
Overcoming harm.
No, it's true. There is, and I've considered it in my presentation, there is Messianic rhetoric, less on the European Union level than in the early days by Adenauer, for example. Yeah, it's quite clearly here. But is the political project itself appealing because it has this Messianic project? In a sense, is it the equivalent to a Marxist project? And I think, no, it's not. It's about more of the same old world, of trade and barter, yeah? And of those who are capable of making money, they get richer and the others get poorer. And that's all perfectly consistent with European integration. So from that perspective...
No longer.
Yeah, not longer. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Please.
Thanks, Sasha. I think I have some doubts about approaching the concept, if it is a concept, of messianism in this rather analytical manner that's approached by Bolzer. Although it might be useful to tease out some things. I mean, is it possible that each historical generation or even each historical period has a different type of messianism?
Messianism, yeah.
I mean, so more specifically in relation to the that's the first question. So we have the end of history, right, Fukuyama. It's another version of messianism of that historical epoch.
Yeah.
But my question in relation to the EU is, wouldn't it be more appropriate to view the founding project of European integration as a reaction against messianism?
Exactly right.
Precisely to the messianisms that interrupt the normal flow of historical time in the interwar period. In that sense, it's reactionary. I mean, not necessarily in a pejorative sense. We can hold the value neutrality of reactionism for the moment. But it seems to make more sense through that lens.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it is a counter project. I would also say it's a counter project to utopian projects that presuppose some kind of fundamental change in the way that we deal with one another. It's always called the change of human nature, but the change of human nature doesn't say much, But the fundamental change of our attitudes and how we deal with one another. It is an attempt. I think there's a certain strong enlightenment component, I would say, to the European project. You take people as they are, they rationally maximize, satisfy their self-interest. How do we do it in a manner that doesn't give rise to too much conflict in the world? So that's what you do. The end of history is an interesting alternative because the end of history, as we encounter it in Fukuyama's work, is history grinds to an end at a certain point. Here we are. This is the end. We've come to the end. We've reached it. We push our nose against the window, and there's nothing on the other side any longer. This is all we have. That's also not a Messianic project. It's a way of realizing this is as good as it gets. I think this is the spirit of. This is how I always read Fukuyama's project. Doesn't get any better.
But But it has aspects of Messianism just without the need to force the
Without the
end.
need to force the end and to go into something that's beyond, yeah, because it's already there. It just universalizes. Yeah, it just becomes
Just
universal.
an observation.
Yeah.
Did you run across Altneuland?
The Herzls,
Yeah.
Herzls, yeah.
Because he had a huge conference in New York,
Joseph,
where everybody was standing had to appear.
yeah.
Altneuland, nobody was informed what Altneuland, because you say we did the Herzl. But
Okay.
this was not the average.
And he was about
And
the.
it is so interesting because my suspicions was just shown.
Yeah.
We did not come back to that.
Yeah.
Altneuland is the beginning of Zionism.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And in a good sense. So I found it interesting, but he did not continue with that. And there was
Yeah.
then the Christian moment.
That's something that I wondered as well when I was preparing this. Is Joseph perhaps guilty of assimilating European integration to some form of Zionist project? But if you look in the history of Zionism, there's a great variety of Zionism. It really doesn't help you much. There's a cultural form of Zionism, there's a radical political form, a reactionary form of Zionism. There's a Zionism that presupposes that the nature of the Jews has to be altered because you cannot make a society with people who are used to being sidelined, discriminated against, stand on the side of society, are differential, yeah, lack courage, yeah. So I think we cannot, I mean, clearly this is his background is religious, yeah, and he comes from this religious background and approaches the European Union, and I find the references, analogy to the covenant, yeah, he never talks about the walking through the desert, yeah, but the promised land, it is somewhat illuminating. If you can do European Union scholarship by pointing to Kant, you can do it also with pointing to the Bible. Yeah, you will always highlight a certain aspect of it. You know, it's. I think that's it's legitimate to do it. Yeah, yeah.
Professor Kuhn.
Here's how I always understood this set of religious references. By the way, the difference between Exodus, as you then interpreted it, and I think as Walter also interpreted it, and the Messianic is subtle. We might think of this if we think of it only as analogies, kind of as a question of degree.
Yeah, that's right.
But for Joseph, I think, let's connect. Let's imagine Adenauer as a constitutional theorist and European Union lawyer. So his idea is there's something fundamental that comes to an end. This is now a new time, and what is new about this time is that we've moved beyond nationalism of a certain kind. We don't want to give up the idea of a national community.
Right.
Adenauer is very much also. There's nothing against the state.
Yeah.
It has to be an integrated state. And this goes to Joseph's writing on Eros and civilization, his kind of constitutional theory with a psychological. So the idea is the national, the erotic, has to be constrained within the civilizational frame. That is to be the discipline of the Europe. So it's the deep change, the deep transformation is exactly the acceptance of an authority that is ultimately not an authority that you control, that is not yours. So the other European citizens that together are somehow imagined as constituting, they are not like us as part of a nation. They are others. But even though they are others of a certain kind that together have the authority to bind us, and that we accept. That's the transformational part. That we are those who accept the authority constituted mostly by others. And that's a kind of, while still maintaining us as a nation. So it's not post-nationalist. It's a radical reconstruction of what it means to be national, while nationality remains central. So I think it's this element that I think for him, if you ask, well, what is fundamental? What is the fundamental moral significance of the European project? I think that's in his own writing at least. That's what he suggested it.
Right, but then in turn, just to continue your thought, and to bring it to the conclusion that I would like to draw from it, then the European Union is in a sense really an anti-Messianic project because it doesn't give you the errors. It doesn't give you the warmth of fellow feeling. that Messianic projects have always promised that there will be unity, the spirit of harmony. Yeah, we will love one another. No, it's an enlightenment project. There will not be love. You will have the experience that you belong somewhere. There's your place. You're at home. There's something that makes you special because you belong to a certain region of the world. All that, yeah, that we really care about, is going to be in the nation state, but we're going to constrain it because we know it's dangerous. That's his other way of presenting it, and it's inconsistent, I think, with the Messianic idea. Yeah, right.
Please.
Well, no, I mean, wonderful that you're picking up on Exodus. I speak as someone who's just finished a book where Exodus plays a very big part, but this time as a metaphor for Brexit. So it's getting out of, it's a promised land coming out of another so-called promised land.
Egypt,
And
European Union is Egypt.
oh, because the Exodus metaphor is all over the place
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Brexit,
right.
really all over. But what I wanted to say is that I think that part of Weiler's problem is that there are two things he's getting at. One is that there are three sources of legitimacy in any political project, which, of course, we have performance and process, output and input. But the first source of legitimacy is purpose. So we have purpose, performance, process. But every polity and project has a purpose, more or less implicit, more or less explicit, more or less contested, etc. So he's conflating two things. He's telling us, hey guys, we need to pay attention to the purpose as articulated at different moment in time. You know, the kind of thing Claudia has written brilliantly about. And then in the same breath, he's telling us about the pathological dimension of this purposive articulation.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, Claudia's book is the best example, and we all know that, and we've been talking about this. The purpose has been contested hugely over time and right at the foundation.
Right.
Moreover, the extent to which the purpose is an end that justifies the means has been contested. So what he is obsessed and worried about for very good reasons is the extent to which the project can be captured by those who believe that the end justifies the mean, and therefore, you know, you didn't really want to vote to say no, like she you know, didn't want to say no because she was wearing a miniskirt. And that's become, you know, the EU modus operandi. The end justifies the means. But there's been a lot of pushback against this. This is what we're living through. And part of the agenda that we're all after is, you know, how can you curtail those who believe that the end justifies the mean, which has always been terrifying in history, right? So he's saying he should have been more humble. In my view. I mean, I've used Messianism quite a few times. So that I love it to denounce my, you know, the demons that I see in the EU. But there are the demons. There are the pathology. Yes, they were dominant at different moments in time, and I think we can't take that away from Weiler, and you were citing Adenauer, etc., etc., etc. I mean, Macron is definitely Messianic, obviously, but he's a bit late, and nobody really listens anyway, thankfully. So,
That's very good.
But that's what I would say, to distinguish between purpose in general and Messianism as a pathology.
As a pathology, yeah, that's a great idea.
Please.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I just thank you so much for your paper and your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to return also to the Adenauer quote that I'm really sorry I didn't get to read aloud now. And as you know, I also cited in my PhD because I think it's really a wonderful expression of the sentiment of the war, and actually really a sentiment of why the European project was understood at that moment in time as Messianic, I would say. It's this new generation, it's a break with the past. It's this idea for the Christian Democrats that Europe is a myth that can sort of fill the void left by totalitarianism. But I wonder, because I actually do agree with much of your analysis, but I wonder in a way whether the European project is sort of or the Messianic aspect of it sort of is killed off by its own success, in the sense that exactly because it was capable of reconstituting the nation states, that the sentiment then never went to Europe, in a sense, because it actually succeeded in stabilizing the state system, which was seen as doomed at the time.
in light of what both of you have said in particular, that there ought to be a purpose, and then there are messianic ways of pursuing it or of describing it, and attempts at formulating it in language with in new language, or casting it in new terms, with the hope that it might then generate sufficient followership, that you can generate the political momentum in order to pursue it. I wonder whether there isn't an alternative theoretical approach that is perhaps more promising to explain what European integration, the promise of a closer closer union among the peoples of Europe, has done on a performative level. And again, I'm talking about things that I know very little about. But there is this now deceased post-Marxist political theorist, Ernest Laclau, who developed the following theory. Under postmodern conditions, no, that's actually a commentary already of his theory. It is no longer possible to formulate in a plausible manner, or it has never been possible. We finally realized that it's not possible to formulate in a plausible manner the ground of society. And ground can mean many things. It can mean how societies actually operate on an explanatory level, the purpose that a society is supposed to serve. We cannot agree on one such concept. So when we invoke something like the conception of order, we want order, and we all want it, we use an empty signifier. And the empty signifier signifies that we don't really know what order is. But we all take our inspiration from the empty signifier and therefore develop different competing accounts of what the empty signifier may be. Now this is roughly, very roughly, Ernesto's ideas that I took, I'm old-fashioned, I'm a full professor, second-hand, from the understandings provided by my assistants in the secondary literature. So it's not really, I cannot say that I'm privy to Ernest Laclau's work. But if you look at the promised land, the ever closer union among the people of Europe, as an empty signifier, it mobilizes as long as we find substitutes for it that are equally empty. More Europe.
Yeah.
The irreversibility of the process. It's all empty signifiers. But it becomes contested, and we begin to have controversies about it as soon as we try to make an attempt to find the one version of the project that will now stick. Then someone will say, we emancipate you from national boundaries, and the others will reply, but that's authoritarian liberalism. That's what we get ourselves. Then we get into political conflict. It only works with the empty signifier. And maybe that's something that Joseph understood intuitively, that there is something to this. Yeah?
Gut Ding will Weiler haben.
Ja? Hm?
Gut Ding will Weiler haben.
Gut Ding will Weiler haben. Yeah. All right. Yeah.